Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're going to tinker with the FTX Mauler. It's a truck I do rather like, but it does have its limitations. We've already swapped out the stock tyres for something with a more aggressive tread, otherwise it's still stock. The main thing though that we're going to tackle today is the general lack of oomph. There's adequate power, but it lacks the punch to really put a grin on your face. Today then, we're going to swap out the electronics and battery for something a bit better than the stock all-in-one unit that the truck comes with. For the ESC, we've got a WP1060, a nice little ESC that'll do 3S with instant forward and reverse. It's not quite as nice as the WP1080, but it is a lot cheaper. For the radio, we're going to be using one of our Fly Skies, so we've got a little 3-channel receiver to go in the truck, which we will be pairing with a GT3C. For the battery, I'm going to use a 3S 2200 mAh pack. I've got a few of these for model aeroplanes, which I haven't seen any use for a while, so they're going to be ideal for this truck to give it a bit of a boost. If we lift the body off the chassis, we can get started. At the moment, I'm using a 4000 mAh 2S pack that doesn't quite fit in the battery holder. It's quite a bit longer than the old 6L9 packs, which is really designed for. It's worked well enough though. The truck's had a couple of dozen packs run through it without any major damage. If we compare it to one of the 2200 mAh packs, you can see there's quite a size difference. We're going to lose quite a bit in capacity, but gain in voltage. The run times shouldn't be all that different. Before we fit the new bits, we're going to need to remove all the old. It's all stuck down with servo tape, and they've used zip ties to keep the wires in check. We're going to need to clip the zip ties, being very careful not to cut into the wires, and unplug the steering servo, headlights and motor from the all-in-one unit. To remove the all-in-one and its switch, we just need a nice blunt flat-bladed screwdriver. You can use a sharp one, but just try not to scratch up the mounting plate. You can shove the driver blade into the servo tape and gently twist. After a couple of goes, it'll free up and you can remove it. The all-in-one is quite a nice unit. For the stock setup, it does the job perfectly. I reckon it would struggle a bit with the 3S pack though, so it's got to go. Unfortunately, removing the all-in-one has left the servo tape on the electronics tray. We can peel some of it off, but we're still left with the sticky layer. We could just stick the new bits on top, but that wouldn't look very nice. I'm going to remove the tray so we can give it a good clean. There's 3 self-tap countersunk screws to remove. They thread into the cross members, pop them out and lift the tray free. To remove the sticky, first we need to peel off as much of the foam remains as we can. Then off camera, I'm just going to spray loads of WD-40 over the sticky spots and leave it to soak for 10 minutes before giving it a good rub. Usually after a couple of goes, it'll all come off quite nicely. You just need to give it a quick soapy scrub to remove all the oil the WD-40 leaves behind. You should end up with a part that looks almost as good as new. We just need to reattach it with the 3 screws and it's ready for the new electronics. Right, new stuff. In the ESC box we have the ESC, but we also have a packet with some sticky pads and heat shrink, a couple of zip ties that are going to come in very handy, as well as some stickers and the instructions. The ESC is going to sit right at the back so we can keep an eye on it through the hole in the back of the body, and so we can position the switch where it's easy to get at. The receiver we're going to sit down on the lower ledge. Ideally we'd pop it in a waterproof box, but for the time being we'll just mount it as is. Partly because the steering servo lead does come up a bit short, so it's going to be a bit of a stretch. It's not a huge problem though. We could just use a short extension, but the servo lead actually goes across the chassis on its way to the back, so if we reroute it, we should be able to free up a little more length. To get at the lead, we're going to need to remove the battery tray with its 2 screws. And just like the electronics tray, they're self-tap countersunk screws. We just unscrew them and lift the battery tray out. There's a couple more zip ties to cut so we can move the lead. You can see how the servo lead runs right across the chassis, taking up some of that valuable length. I'm guessing they did it so the lead isn't running right up against the motor, which with older radios, especially 27 and 40 MHz sets, would cause some major glitches. These days though, while it's still not ideal, with a 2.4 GHz radio you'll almost certainly get away with it. If we plug the servo into channel 1 on the receiver, you can see there's just enough length to be comfortable. We want to make sure that nothing can pull on the lead as the axles move up and down, and there's enough at the receiver end that we can unplug it if we need to. Where the servo and the headlight leads run along the chassis, we need a couple of new zip ties. So we'll just use the two that came with the ESC. For now, we'll do them up just loosely so we can still position the wires once everything else is back on the chassis. 2 or 3 clicks short of tight will do the job. We can plug the motor wires into the ESC and plan their route. We need to make sure there's enough length to run them the long way around the gearbox so they're not hanging over the receiver. If we zip tie them to one of the posts between the metal plates on the gearbox, it'll keep them out of the way with everything just about in reach. Before we start sticking things down, we need to make sure that there's no oil and grease around. So we're going to use some IPA, alcohol, on a paper towel to wipe the bottom of the receiver and the ESC. Then we use some servo tape to stick the receiver to the lower ledge and the ESC to the top. To keep the motor wires safe, we're going to pass a zip tie around one of the posts on the gearbox and just loosely attach the wires. We'll do the zip ties up a bit tighter when we know for sure we've got the wires the right way around. Usually black to blue would be a good bet, but it's not 100%. With all that sorted, we can refit the battery tray. Although the stock tray is a bit big for those 2200 packs. Even if we do up the Velcro straps, the pack's still going to be floating around in there. So here we have a new 3D printed tray sized up to be snug around the new battery. It's got slots for the stock straps to transfer across and has 2 countersunk holes to mount to the chassis. All we need to do is fit the straps, offer it up to the chassis and attach with the 2 screws that we removed earlier. Pop the battery in and do up the straps. Nice and simple. The tray should be up on Thingiverse if you want the STL, link in the description as usual. Next we'll connect the ESC to the receiver. Now there's lots of extra wire here, so we'll fold it up and add a zip tie to take up the extra. You really don't want lots of long wires floating around in a truck. It's all too easy for them to find their way into something that spins, or even get caught up on a stick and get ripped out. The last big thing to attach is the switch, which we just use a bit more servo tape to stick it down to the rear edge of the electronics tray. That way it looks nice and neat, but we can still access it through the body or up through the bottom of the chassis. Okay, to set things up we need to change the options on the ESC. First we need to move the battery jumper so it's on LiPo. That way it'll stop the truck at a sensible voltage so we can't damage the batteries. Second, we'll set the mode to forward brake, effectively disabling reverse. That way we can set the throttle reverse on the transmitter and check the motor wires so we can be sure everything's going in the right direction. Now to be safe, we'll stand the truck up on some HobbyWing boxes just in case it tries to shoot off by itself. Plug in a bind plug into channel 3 on the FlySky receiver. Connect up the battery. It's worth noting the battery has an XT60 connector and the ESC has a Tamiya connector, so for the time being I'm just using an adapter. Ultimately we'll change the Tamiya connector to an XT60. Now you can turn on the truck, hold the bind button down on the transmitter and turn that on, and the red light on the receiver should stop blinking. If so, we're all set. We just need to power down again and remove the bind plug. This time when we power up we should have control. Nice. The steering's backwards though, so that's going to need reversing. There's also the trim to set and the endpoints, but we'll have a quick look at that in a couple of minutes. First, let's sort out the ESC. Well, while pulling the trigger it really doesn't do anything, but pushing it away does spin up the motor. Remember, we've got reverse disabled, so we need to reverse the channel on the transmitter. But the wheels are also running in reverse, so we're also going to need to swap the motor wires. On the transmitter then, we drop into the channel reverse setting and reverse channel 2. On the chassis we need to pull the bullet connectors and swap them round. This time, when we power up, we should find pulling the trigger spins the motors, making the wheels spin forwards. And pushing the trigger away only applies the brakes. And there we go. we now know the channel is set up for the ESC and the motor is wired up to match. Now we just need to turn it off again and pull the jumper for the running mode on the ESC so it's in forward, brake, reverse mode, as is normal for a crawler, and give it one more quick test. And that looks pretty much perfect. The ESC setup is complete. Next we'll look at the steering. Flip the chassis over so we can see the knuckles and run the steering with no load. Then go into the trim or the sub-trim menu if you have it and adjust the steering until it's close to as straight as you can get it. To get it bang on, you'll need to give it an extra tweak when you drive it for the first time. Next go into the endpoints and adjust them until at full lock on the wheel the servo doesn't quite bind. With this setup you have to dial the endpoints a long way back, or the steering collides with the axle on the inside wheel. It really needs a shorter servo arm, but the endpoints will do for now. I think there's just one thing left to do before we can go for a test run. We need to secure the antenna somewhere. Ideally we'd stand it up in a tube away from the metal parts, but we're going to get away with taping it down to the plastic rear brace. It's right next to the chassis, which isn't brilliant, but it's going to do. Just a couple of wraps with some electrical tape is all we really need to do. Right, body on and we can head outside. The result of all this work, of course, is the truck is now much faster and torquier, which is nice for driving, but I do wonder how long the plastic diff lockers are going to last. To be honest, I had expected them to have given up already just on the 2-cell pack. I don't have a vast amount of video of it running, but I'll do what I often do and upload it in a separate video at 50 frames a second. There's going to be a link in the description. For this video though, that's it. So as always, thanks for watching, like if you liked, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!